The wind carried dust instead of mercy that morning. It scraped across the dry graves like it meant to bury the living next. Clara Harper stood by the raw earth that now held her husband, Eli, and watched the preacher's lips move without hearing a word. The wooden cross at the head of the grave leaned slightly, shadows stretching long across the prairie like it was already tired. Her black dress fluttered in the cold wind. Her son, Samuel, no older than 8, clung to her skirt. Her youngest, Anna, too small to understand, tried to catch the drifting dirt in her hands. The preacher closed his book, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And that was all Eli got. Behind the mourners, 2 horses waited, one sleek and black, one brown and restless. The men astride them didn't belong to the churchyard crowd. One wore a tailor coat that didn't fit this land, and his boots had never known mud. The other, slimmer, younger, hat tipped low, looked like he wasn't sure he wanted to be there. When the preacher turned away, the older man stepped forward and said, "Mrs. Harper." His voice was dry as chalk. "My condolences. Truly, but business is business." Clara's eyes lifted slowly. "You couldn't wait one day?" The man ignored her tone and opened a small ledger. "Your husband's debt to Hale and Company. Bank stands at $800, plus interest. He was behind by 3 months at the time of his passing. As such—" "You'll get nothing today," she interrupted. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled on Samuel's shoulder. "As such," the man continued, "the bank must reclaim the Harper property by sundown tomorrow unless the debt is cleared in full." Murmurs rippled among the mourners. No one met her eyes. That's how it was out here. No one meddled in another's ruin. The younger man finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Mr. Davis, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Davis snapped. "Business doesn't pause for grief." Clara looked at the younger one, tall, clean-shaven, eyes pale as washed sky. He looked sorry in a way that felt almost worse than cruelty. "And who are you?" "Thomas Hale," he said softly. She froze. "Hale as in the banker?" "Yes, ma'am. My father owns Hale and Company." Clara's jaw tightened. "Then I suppose you came to watch what his greed bought him." Thomas looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. "No, ma'am. I came to see if there's another way." Davis scowled. "There isn't." He tore a sheet from his ledger and handed it to her, a foreclosure notice. The paper fluttered in the wind like a white flag. "By order of Hale and Company, this land reverts to the bank at sundown tomorrow." Clara didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the hole in the earth where her husband lay. Then she reached out, took the notice, and folded it neatly in half. "You can bury that next to him," she said. Davis turned red. "Ma'am." But she'd already walked away, Samuel and Anna clinging to her skirts, the wind snapping the hem of her dress as she went. Thomas Hale sat on his horse a moment longer, watching her disappear down the dusty road toward a house that was no longer hers. He didn't know why it mattered, but he wished he hadn't come. The preacher crossed himself. "Son," he said to Thomas quietly, "some debts can be paid in coin. Best remember that." By nightfall, the prairie was nothing but a whispering sheet of black. The lantern in Clara's window burned weakly against the dark, its glow flickering across bare walls and the unpaid note nailed to her barn door. The farm was nearly silent now. No cattle, no laughter, no Eli's boots clomping across the porch. Only the creak of the windmill, and the wind sifting through broken boards. She tucked Samuel and Anna into the small bed they shared. Samuel looked up, eyes too old for his years. "Mama, I didn't take our house." She brushed his hair back. "They can't take what's already ours." "But they said—" "I said no one's taking anything," she whispered, pulling the blanket tight. "Now close your eyes." When they were asleep, she went to the fireplace and lifted down Eli's rifle from above the mantel. The wood was scarred, the barrel clean. She checked the chamber. 2 bullets left. Enough. She sat by the window, watching the horizon. The moon rose slow, pale and distant. Hours passed. The night sang with coyotes and creaking boards. Her eyes stung with smoke and tears she refused to let fall. When dawn came, she was still awake. The rumble of hooves broke the morning quiet. She stepped onto the porch barefoot, rifle in hand. 5 riders came over the hill, Davis in the lead, his black coat snapping like a crow's wing. "Mrs. Harper," he called, "I told you the terms. And I told you you'd have to take it from me." He laughed, dismounting. "I'm not here to fight a widow." "Then ride back." Behind him, one of the men spat. "She's bluffing." Clara raised a rifle, sight steady. "Try me." The air went still. Thomas Hale appeared behind the riders, reining in hard. "Stop." His voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "Mr. Davis, enough." Davis turned. "The property's forfeit." "I'll take responsibility for the debt," Thomas said, voice low but firm. "Personally." The men exchanged looks. Davis frowned. "You can't just—" "I just did." Clara's arms trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. "Why?" she asked him. "Why would you pay a stranger's debt?" Thomas dismounted, stepping carefully closer. "Because it wasn't right what happened here, and because your husband died trying to pay what he owed." Her eyes narrowed. "And now you'll collect on me instead?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'll give you time." "That's all." Davis growled. "You'll regret this, boy. Your father—" Thomas cut him off. "My father can answer to me later." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. The wind rustled dry grass around their boots. Then, slowly, she lowered the rifle. Davis spat in the dirt, turned his horse, and rode off with his men. Only Thomas stayed. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said. "Neither did you," he replied, nodding toward the rifle. She looked at him for the first time, not as the banker's son, but as a man standing alone between her and ruin. "You should go," she said quietly. "I will," he said, mounting up, "but I'll be back tomorrow. There's some supplies coming from town. Food, lumber, seed. Consider a loan. I don't take charity." He met her gaze evenly. "Then call it business, Mrs. Harper." He tipped his hat and rode off into the sunrise, the dust behind him glowing like gold before fading into nothing. Inside, Clara leaned the rifle against the wall and sank to the floor, her breath shaking. Samuel's voice came from the doorway. "Mama, who is that man?" Clara looked toward the window where the sun was just breaking over the fields. "Someone who doesn't know what kind of trouble he's in," she said softly. The next day dawned pale and cold, sky washed clean after the night's wind. Clara was mending a fence when she heard hooves again. She straightened, hands shading her eyes. Thomas rode up alone this time, a wagon trailing behind loaded with sacks of grain lumber and a crate marked tools. She frowned. "You're persistent." He climbed down, smiling faintly. "My father says that's my worst quality. I'd say it's your most dangerous." He unhitched the wagon. "I told you I'd make this a business arrangement. You'll pay me back when the harvest comes. No interest. That's not how business works." He shrugged. "Maybe not your kind of business." She studied him, hands clean but callous now, eyes steady. He didn't look like a man playing hero, more like someone trying to set something right in himself. The children peeked from the doorway, whispering. Samuel finally asked, "Mister, you really bringing all that for us?" Thomas smiled. "For your ma, actually, but I reckon you'll eat some too." Clara almost smiled, then caught herself. "You said this is a loan?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then I'll sign for it." He nodded, pulling a folded paper and pen from his coat. She bent over the fence rail and scrawled her name with the same careful hand she'd used on her marriage certificate. "Mrs. Harper," he said, rolling the paper away. "I know you don't trust me." "I wouldn't either. But I meant what I said. Some debts aren't fair to collect." She straightened, dusting her hands. "Fairness don't keep a roof up, Mr. Hale." "No," he said quietly, "but neither does pride." They looked at each other a long moment, wind stirring the dust between them. That night, Thomas rode home slow, watching the horizon burn orange behind the ranch he'd just saved. He didn't understand why it mattered so much, only that it did. Back at the Harper homestead, Clara watched the same horizon from her porch. The fields lay quiet, the windmill creaking in rhythm with the settling house. She could still smell Eli's tobacco in the air, faint as memory. When she turned to go inside, she paused at the rifle resting by the door. Her reflection in the barrel was thin and hollow-eyed, but something in her gaze had changed. Not peace, not hope, something rougher, something like fight. She whispered to the empty yard. If he thinks I'll owe him anything more than what's written, he's wrong. But her voice faltered at the end, because deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere over the distant hills, rolling low and slow like a warning. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, she stood on that porch a long time, watching the storm build, the paper sign with her name trembling against the window pane. The prairie held its breath. Kindness was a dangerous thing to owe. By mid-spring, the fields around the Harper Ranch were green again. Shoots of wheat trembled in the wind, like slender hope rising out of old grief. The house still leaned in places, but the roof held. The walls no longer whispered when the storm came. Clara Harper worked from dawn to dusk. Sleeves rolled to her elbows, skin brown by sun and wind. She didn't wait for help, though help seemed to find her anyway. Thomas Hale came twice a week now, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just his hands. He was learning the rhythm of the land, the creak of the water pump, the scent of sun-warmed soil, the quiet hum of insects under the endless sky. The town called a scandal. At the general store, voices dropped when Clara's name was spoken. Widow Harper, they whispered, still living on the land she lost. Must be that banker's boy keeping her there. She's clever, that one, knows how to keep a man's attention. Or maybe he's got something to make right. When Thomas rode into town for supplies, men tipped their hats slow, women turned away. One old rancher muttered as he passed, "Your pa's money could buy a lot, boy, but not a good name." Thomas ignored them, though his jaw tightened each time. At the ranch, Clara noticed a tension in him growing like a knot that wouldn't come loose. One afternoon, as they worked the fence line, she asked, "Why keep coming back if it's hurting your reputation?" He drove a nail into a post, sweat on his brow. "Because a good name's only worth something if it means something." She studied him quietly. "And what's yours mean?" He looked out toward the hills. "Not what my father made of it." The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It carried the sound of saws, nails, laughter from the children, and the quiet companionship of two people trying to rebuild different kinds of ruin. But even as the ranch mended, the world beyond it darkened. The land was greedy and men were worse. It happened the night after Thomas told her his father had found out. He had ridden out just before sunset, face grim. He sent word, Thomas said, "I'm throwing away my future for a woman I barely know." Clara didn't answer. She just kept stacking hay, the lantern light golden on her face. Then maybe he don't know his son. Thomas had smiled faintly, a tired smile. "He'll never forgive me for this." "You don't need his forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said, mounting his horse. "But he's not the only one who's angry. There are men in town, ones who wanted this land. You be careful, Clara." He rode off as the sun sank, and the world fell into the hush of twilight. That night, the wind came hard from the west, carrying the scent of smoke before she saw it. She woke to the sound of crackling. By the time she threw open the door, the barn was aflame, orange tongues licking at the sky, sparks rising like fireflies from hell. "Samuel! Anna!" she shouted, running barefoot through the yard. The children stumbled out of their room, frightened and crying. She shoved the rifle into Samuel's hands. "Keep your sister by the well. Don't move till I say." She ran for the barn. The horses screamed inside. The heat hit her like a wall. She grabbed a bucket, flung water, but the flames only roared higher. Sparks rained into her hair, stung her arms. One of the beams cracked, splitting open with a groan like the earth itself crying out. "Move!" a voice shouted. Thomas burst through the smoke, his coat half burned, eyes wild. He seized her arm, pulling her back just as the roof caved in behind them. The air whooshed hot and heavy. They fell together in the dirt, coughing, ash clinging to their faces. "Are the kids?" she began. "Safe," he rasped. "By the well." She turned toward the blaze, eyes wide with disbelief. All of it gone. Thomas got to his knees, sweat and soot streaking his face. Not all. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away this time. The fire burned until dawn, leaving nothing but blackened beams and twisted iron. When the first light touched the ruins, Clara stood silent, Thomas beside her. The children huddled near the porch steps, eyes hollow. Thomas said softly, "Someone did this on purpose." Clara nodded. "I smell kerosene." He clenched his jaw. "I'll find out who." "Don't," she said quickly. "This land's brought enough blood." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw fear in him. Not for himself, but for her. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and burned hay toward town. By noon, every gossip in Oak Bluff would know. But for that moment, they stood together among the ashes, two silhouettes against a rising sun, both stubborn enough to stay and foolish enough to care. By morning, the story had spread like the fire itself. At the saloon, men whispered over whiskey glasses. Someone torched the Harper place. Bet the widow lit it herself. Insurance money. No, it was Hale's boy, trying to win her pity. Either way, she ain't lost in the season. Mr. Hale Sr. sat in his bank office, the morning paper trembling slightly in his hands. His jaw was set, eyes sharp with something between rage and disbelief. When Thomas entered without knocking, the old man didn't look up. You may have fooled his family. Thomas's boots echoed across the wooden floor. You did that long before me. The elder Hale folded the paper. Do you even know what that woman's done? She's turned half this town against you. No, Thomas said evenly. You did that when you sent your collectors to her husband's grave. The air between them went still. You'll stop seeing her, Hale Sr. said. You'll come back to the bank. There's talk enough already. I'm not coming back, Thomas said, his father's voice lowered to a hiss. Then you're no son of mine. Thomas met his eyes, calm but cold. Then I guess I was never yours to begin with. He walked out without another word, the door swinging shut behind him. That afternoon, Clara was repairing what little she could have borne when she saw him ride in. His face was different, set hard, tired in a way that came from something deeper than work. Your father? She asked quietly. He's done with me, Thomas said. Said I ruined his name. She went back to hammering. Maybe you've given it something worth carrying. He leaned against a post, watching her. You ever think about leaving? Starting over somewhere no one knows you? Can't, she said. This is Eli's land, my children's land. He nodded. Then I'll help you hold it. Her hammer paused mid-swing. You don't owe me that. He smiled faintly. You don't owe me either. Seems fair. For the first time, she smiled back, small but real. That night, rain came. Not a storm, just a slow, steady rain that soaked into the scorched ground, hissing over the blackened beams. Thomas helped her patch a hole in the roof, both of them dripping, lantern light flickering between them. I should hate you, she said suddenly. He looked up. Why? Because of what your name's done. He nodded. I hate it too. They finished in silence, the rain beating soft on the shingles. When it was done, they sat by the hearth. The children were asleep, the fire low. Thomas stared into the flames. I keep thinking about your husband, he said, about how he died working off a debt that wasn't fair. My father calls that business. I call it sin. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. You can't fix what's gone. Maybe not, he said, but I can stop it happening again. She turned toward him, studying the earnestness in his eyes. You'd lose everything. I already have, he said. For a moment, the room was only breath and firelight. The tension between them had changed, no longer grief and guilt, but something fragile and alive. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Outside, thunder rolled far away, faint but steady, like the warning of a world that never stayed quiet for long. Then came the sound, hooves in the distance. Thomas stiffened. Clara rose, hand on the rifle. Through the rain-blurred window, two riders passed slowly on the ridge, their silhouettes dark against a lightning flash. Bank men, she whispered. He shook his head. No, worse. They stood together, silent, watching the figures vanish into storm. Whatever peace they'd found was already slipping away. When Thomas left that night, he paused by his horse and said, "You'll lock the doors?" She nodded, "And keep the rifle close." He looked at her one last time, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "You shouldn't have to fight alone." "I've been alone since the day he died," she said. "But thank you for standing with me now." Thomas hesitated, then whispered, "For what it's worth, Clara, you're the strongest person I've ever met." She gave him a look that was part warning, part gratitude. "Strength don't make you safe, Mr. Hale." He nodded once, then mounted up and disappeared into the rain. Inside, she sat by the window long after the light was gone. The fire had burned down to embers. In the dark glass, she saw her own reflection, wet hair, tired eyes, and the faintest spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or the edge of it. But as the night stretched on, the wind shifted again, carried with a faint echo of laughter. Men's voices far off on the ridge. She reached for the rifle. Whatever was coming, she knew it wouldn't wait long. And for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. The dawn came slow, pale and cold, like a wounded thing crawling over the ridgeline. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and iron, the taste of dust still on her tongue. Samuel sat by the dying fire, coat half off his shoulders, hat tipped low. His hands, scarred and steady, were busy patching the tear in his sleeve from last night's fight. The bandage around his ribs had darkened with blood. For a moment, she just watched him. The light caught the hard edges of his face, the way his jaw clenched when he tied the thread tight. She'd seen men work like that before, deliberate, silent, carrying pain like a private oath. Her late husband had been that way too, before the drinking, before the debt, and the sickness. "You should have let me do that," she said softly. Samuel glanced up. "Didn't want to wake you." "You didn't," she murmured, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Been awake since the wind changed. Can't sleep when it's too quiet." He gave a faint smile. "Quiet's a rare thing out here. You learn to take it when it comes." The fire popped. The horses shifted beyond the wagon, restless in the scent of ash and blood that lingered in the air. Clara turned her eyes toward the horizon. Low fog on the grasslands, the kind that carried sound in strange ways. Somewhere far off, a hawk called, sharp and lonely. "What happens now?" she asked. Samuel didn't answer right away. He set down the needle and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Now," he said finally, "now we ride to the bank in Carson Bluff. I settled the debt my father laid on you." Her stomach tightened. "You mean face them?" "I mean face him," Samuel said. "My father doesn't scare easy, but he'll hear the truth, one way or another." Clara stood. Her boots sank into the cold dirt, the hem of her skirt brushing the grass damp with dew. "You'd stand against your own blood for me?" He looked up at her, eyes unreadable in the pale light. "For what's right," he said simply, "and maybe for you too." She swallowed hard. There were 100 things she could have said, thanks, fear, doubt, but they all tangled in her throat. So she nodded once and began to pack the wagon. By the time the sun burned off the fog, they were on the trail again. The land stretched wide and empty, rolling hills the color of straw, sagebrush catching the wind. The morning passed without talk. Only the rhythm of hooves, the creak of leather, and the low whistle of wind to the grass filled the silence. When they stopped by a dry creek bed for water, Samuel took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "And go where?" "This land took my husband, my hope, and half my heart, but it's still the only home I know." He studied her then, the way the sun caught the strand of her hair, the quiet steadiness in her eyes. "Home's not a place," he said. "It's someone who stays when everyone else leaves." She didn't answer. She couldn't. But something shifted inside her then, soft and dangerous. They reached Carson Bluff by sundown. The town looked smaller than she remembered, but sharper too, like the edges had grown teeth. Smoke rose from chimneys. The saloon windows glowed amber, filled with laughter that sounded too loud for such a tired place. At the end of the street stood the building that started it all, the Carson Bluff Bank, 2 stories of brick, with white columns and a polished brass sign that gleamed even in the fading light. Samuel pulled his horse to a stop. "Stay by the wagon," he said quietly. "No matter what happens." Samuel. But he'd already dismounted, jaw set like a man walking to war. Clara's hands shook as she gripped the reins. She watched him push open those tall glass doors and disappear inside. Then came the muffled sound of voices, low at first, then rising. A crash, a shout, her breath caught. The air turned heavy. And then a single gunshot split the dusk. Clara was running before she knew it, boots pounding against the boardwalk, skirt tangling around her legs. The doors of the bank slammed open and Samuel stumbled out, smoke curling from the revolver in his hand. Behind him, a man lay on the marble floor, gray-haired, fine-suited, blood blooming dark across his vest. "Samuel!" she cried, rushing to him. He caught her before she could fall. "It's over," he rasped. He drew first. Her gaze darted past him to the body on the floor, the banker, his father, the man who'd sent riders to take her ranch, her home, the man Samuel had sworn to face. "You killed him," she whispered. Samuel shook his head, grim. "He left me no choice. He wouldn't let it go. Said you were just another debtor's widow, to break beneath the law. Said I'd ruin the family for nothing." Clara's knees weakened. And now, he looked out at the street, where faces had begun to gather, townsfolk whispering, watching, judging. "Now they'll come for me, every man loyal to the Carson name." She grabbed his arm. "Then we run." He stared at her a moment, long enough to see the fear and the fire both alive in her eyes. And then he nodded. "Get the horses." They tore through the outskirts of Carson Bluff as the church bell began to toll, warning of death. Bullets sang through the air, striking wood and dust behind them. The wagon rattled, wheels screaming over the ruts. Clara clung to the reins, teeth gritted, heart hammering in her chest. Samuel rode beside her, firing back when shadows appeared on the ridgeline. "Keep west," he shouted, toward the bluff. She followed the sound of his voice through the chaos. The wild wind, the cracking gunfire, the cry of frightened horses. The road curved along the edge of the canyon, narrow and treacherous. One mistake, one slip of a hoof, and they'd tumble into nothing. But Samuel didn't falter. Not once. Even when his gun clicked empty. Even when his shirt soaked red again. He turned his horse into the line of fire to draw them away from her, riding hard, reckless. Like he didn't care what the next breath cost him. "Samuel!" she screamed, tears blurring her sight. He turned back once, just once, and she saw the faintest smile break through the blood and dust. "Keep going." Then the ridge exploded with gunfire. His horse reared, and he fell hard into the dirt. Clara pulled up, threw herself in the wagon, and ran to him. "No, don't you dare," she cried, pressing her hands to his wound. "You stay with me." He coughed, eyes struggling to focus on her face. Clara listened. His hand found hers, trembling. "There's a deed in my coat pocket. I signed it this morning. The ranch, it's yours now, free and clear." She shook her head, tears spilling fast. "I don't want land. I want you." A faint laugh escaped him. Stubborn woman. She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it to the wound, desperate. "You're not dying here. Not for me." "I'm not," he whispered, voice fading. "I'm dying with you." The thunder of hooves grew louder. The posse was closing in. Clara looked toward the canyon, then back at him. There was no way out. Not unless. She grabbed his revolver and stood, heart pounding. "You gave me my land back," she said, eyes fierce. "Now I'm giving you your name back." When the riders appeared over the ridge, she fired. Not wild, not blind, measured, precise. Each shot echoed to the canyon like a prayer. They scattered, startled, unsure if they faced 1 or 10. Samuel, half conscious, watched her silhouette framed against the dying sun. Her shawl torn, her hair whipping in the wind, a woman who'd lost everything except her will. By the time the smoke cleared, the riders were gone. The only sound left was the wind moaning through the cliffs. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, breath ragged. "It's over," she whispered. "We're safe." He stirred weakly, eyes flickering open. "Clara." She leaned close, pressing her forehead to his. "Don't speak." But he did, voice breaking. "Marry me. Right now. No preacher, no papers. Just you and me." Her heart caught. "You're delirious." "I'm dying," he said. "And I want the last thing I say to mean something." She stared at him, the world blurring at the edges. Then she nodded through her tears. "All right. Yes." His lips curved faintly. "Say it." "I'll be your wife," she whispered. "Right here, under God and the wind, and whatever's left of this cursed world." He smiled, a real one this time, and closed his eyes as she kissed his forehead. For a moment, time stilled. The world was nothing but their breath, their touch, the faint hum of life clinging to the edge of night. Then, like a miracle, he drew a deeper breath, slow, steady, painful but alive. Clara gasped and pressed her ear to his chest. His heart was still beating. Weak, but there. She laughed through the tears, clutching his hand. "You're too stubborn to die, Samuel Carson." He opened his eyes again, dazed but smiling. "I told you I'd settle the debt." Days later, when the law finally came, they found her tending to him in a small cabin by the river. The sheriff read the situation, saw the deed, the wound, and the broken man who'd stood against his own blood for love, and he walked away without a word. By the next spring, when the snows melted and the grass came back green, the sign above the ranch gate read, "Carson Homestead." Not in the bank's name, not in debt, but in theirs. And on quiet evenings, when the wind passed soft through the willows, Clara would watch the sun sink low and smile, because she knew the truth no lawman could change. Her husband had died owing the bank, but the banker's son had given her his name instead.